All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Automation Hour. And let me get it into presentation mode. There we go. Awesome. Okay, if you are joining us for the first time, all lines will be muted. And if you have any questions, post them out on the Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour, or you can post them here. We will post the recording as well as the link to the deck sometime after the session. It will be available on our website, automationhour.com, as well as our Trailblazer community, Salesforce Automation Hour. So we are booked through mid-June so far this year. So looking forward to additional new people, first-time presenters coming on, repeat presenters, and we will be reaching out shortly for additional presenters for the rest of the year. So if you have a business use case and a cool process automation solution that you would like to share with the community, definitely reach out to me and we will get you in for a future session. And we can't bring this free webinar series to you without our sponsor, Concrete.io. So thank you for continuing to sponsor us. And here are your co-hosts, myself, David, and Rakesh. And we're really excited to have Ohad on, first-time presenter. I can't even believe it. Why haven't we had him on before? Don't know, but we finally got him on. Very excited for him to share his knowledge with you all today. So let me hand over presenter rights to Ohad. And you should have control now.
I do. 1 second. Okay, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jennifer. I'm so excited to be here. And just like you, I don't know how it's been so long and I've never presented here. But having said that, I'm very happy to be here with all of you today. A little bit about myself, as you can see on the screen. I am the founder and CEO of Praxis. We're a Salesforce consulting company. I've been a Salesforce MVP for 5 years now. Have 15 certifications. I live in Richmond, Virginia. Moved down here about 3 years ago from New York area, and before that, I was born and raised in Israel. Done a lot of presentations over the years. I'm on Twitter, and I am an original accidental admin from around 2010. Started my career with my boss calling me one day and saying, "Hey, Ohad, have you ever heard of Salesforce?" And I said, "No, what is that?" And he says, "I don't know, but it's now your problem." And that has taken me on the career path where I am today, and I always thanked him for that. So that's a little bit about me. And let's talk about what we are going to talk about today. Oh, I wanted to do a little experiment here today. So I know there's a lot of people. There's 50 people on this webinar. And I was on a webinar yesterday where one of the suggestions was maybe instead of having everybody on mute, have everybody. Thank you. I think that you muted me, Jennifer. Anyways, it was recommended to me that we can try to unmute everybody and people can individually mute themselves if they have too much noise. So I would love to have that as an experiment, and if it doesn't really work, we can always just mute everybody back. So Jennifer, are you able to unmute everybody? Because I don't think I have the permission to do that.
Hold on, let me see. Okay, so I unmuted everyone so they can.
So feel free to unmute yourself. I love having a little bit of a more conversational, natural conversation rather than me talking to an empty room. Hi, everybody. I can hear people. It's exciting.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello.
Look at that. Awesome. Okay, so feel free to leave your microphones unmuted and interrupt or ask questions if you have questions throughout the conversation. Obviously, try to be respectful of everybody else. If there's a lot of background noise around you, just mute yourself. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about why admins in the Salesforce world are really awesome. We'll then talk a little bit about how do we approach scoping projects and tackling new tasks. How do we, as admins, create magic? And then really the fun part is really just, let's look at some actual stuff. So why are we awesome admins? Why does Salesforce call their admins awesome admins? So depending on how you started your career, you may or may not know that an admin, and I do hear some echoes. So if you don't have a microphone, please mute yourself. Thank you. So to those of you who don't know, Salesforce admins are really not like admins in many, many other systems. In many other systems, an admin role is just really taking care of things like making sure that the system is still running, creating users, stuff like that, but not really creating custom functionality. That's usually the job of a developer, right? And in the Salesforce world as admins, as you all know, as frequent visitors of the Automation Hour webinar, we create stuff. So we're not just button clickers. We're not just people who make sure that users have access and help them that they can't log into the system. We create new stuff. We innovate. We find really ways to bring value to the business. And we ask the tough questions, or at least hopefully we do, right? And just like Batman, we have an amazing tool belt, right? The tool belt is all the tools that Salesforce gives us, the declarative tools for automation, creating objects, creating lightning pages, and so on. And we also are a very cohesive community, right? All of you know how powerful the Salesforce community, the Trailblazer community is, right? There's many places to ask questions. There's many places to ask for help and for guidance. And it's really just such an appealing thing, at least for me it was when I first got into this world, to see something that I've never seen before. So when we start a new project, or if we have a new task that comes up and we've been asked to implement something or develop something, one of the most important things we can do is really just asking the right questions. And asking the right question can really make the difference between you building something that will get your people to say, okay, yeah, that works kind of, or maybe doesn't even do what they really expected, or creating something that while meets the criteria of what they wanted, would never actually be used because it doesn't really solve a lot of the problems. And so asking the right questions is going to help you create real value to your organization or to your customers, internal or external. So when you try to find what should be the next thing I need to work on, some of the questions I've found really helpful to ask are things like, what is your biggest pain, right? If you talk to somebody in accounting or in whatever department, operations, logistics, and you want to find out how you can help them, is the first question is, what is your biggest pain? What are those things that you do day to day or in your weekly processes that really take the most time, that you wish you didn't have to do this every single week? What are the most manual processes, things that take just a lot of things? And are the things that you keep track of using emails or papers? Like actually people actually still carry papers from one desk to another, collecting signatures. That's a perfect example of an approval process, right? Those are questions that really allow us to kind of ask people the questions that allow us to figure out what we can do to help them and implement something that will make their life easier. And then when you start a new project, some of the first question that I like to ask my my customers is, let's talk about the process. Where does this process start? Where does it end? What is kind of the definition of the beginning and the end of the process? And then tell me the different steps. And we usually take the time to then, whether we do it formally on a piece of paper or at least mentally, have a really clear flow chart of what the process looks like from beginning to end. The question that I love to ask all the time is why? Why do you do this? Is this necessary? Is there a reason behind it? And a lot of time I find that people don't even know why this step is necessary. They just do it because they were told to do it, or because it's always been done this way, or because it kind of makes sense, but when you really start to ask the why question, people come up with, yeah, I don't really know why we need to do this. Or suddenly the reason why it's done is a really good answer for why you can automate something. And of course, in each one of these steps, can we describe this step as a set of rules? And that really allows us to kind of think about already, is this something that we can automate, right? Is this something that somebody really needs to look at to make a decision? Or can we simplify it and say, if this is the condition, then just do that automatically, right? And then we can a lot of time take these steps that can be really defined as rules and make them automatic. And of course, why? So as admins, where do we create our magic? Obviously, we have all of our beautiful declarative tools, the page or app builder, flows, and of course, I'll mention workflows and process builders. And I will say that if you have, for some reason, shied away from using flows until now, because workflows and process builders have been enough, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you should really put the time into learning flows. And of course, we have custom objects, custom permission, custom metadata, well, you know, a lot of other things that we as admins have access to in Salesforce. And then we also use some other things to create this extra magic when we reach the end or the limit of what these out-of-the-box capabilities can do. So we can install App Exchange application. There's also App Exchange Lightning components that we can just put on Lightning pages. To those of you who are familiar, Unofficial Salesforce is a phenomenal place to find community-developed components or applications that you can use to extend the capabilities of your automation or customization. And of course, you can always work with your developers to create custom components, custom code, or whatever else is needed to create your magic. So all of this is wonderful. Let's look at some real stuff and get our hands dirty. So I will show my screen and I will give a little bit of context to what we're about to look at. So this is an example of some work that I've done with one of our customers. And what you see right now on your screen is what we call a sitemap for an App Exchange app called Rootstock. Rootstock is a Salesforce-based ERP system. An ERP system is just a way to describe an application that is used to run a business beyond what Salesforce is typically considered the CRM side, the opportunity and sales side. An ERP is really about running your entire business. So things like inventory, things like sales order when you sell stuff to your customer, purchase order when you want to buy stuff, all of your accounting, that's all part of an ERP system. There's many ERPs in the world. Microsoft has Microsoft Dynamics, Oracle has Oracle ERP, eBusiness Suite, SAP, those are really the big three. And then there's thousands of other ERPs that are smaller, and Rootstock is an example of one of those smaller ERPs that is a native solution on the Salesforce platform. So this is not something that lives somewhere else. It's on Salesforce 100%. And Salesforce has a lot of different things that it can do. As you can kind of see by the sitemap, there's a million things it can do. When Salesforce was first created, Lightning was not really yet a thing. Not Salesforce, sorry, when Rootstock was created, Lightning was not really a thing. And in order for them to provide the kind of complex user interface that you need for some of these activities, they had to really rely on Visualforce heavily. So I'm going to show you a page we call the work order page. Work orders are a way for us to define something that we need to make. So if you think of a work order like a recipe for a cake, or I'm sorry, if you think about an organization that, a bakery, for example, right, a commercial bakery, a work order will be a customer order that we need to now make a cake. When we look at that, we have our bill of materials. That is the list of ingredients. What are these ingredients that we need to make the cake? And we have something we call operations, which is what are the steps that we need to take using these ingredients to then make the cake. This is a work order screen. You can see this is the Rootstock Visualforce page. And you can see there's a lot of information here. There's some buttons. There's a bunch of different tabs that show information that's relevant. And there's some related list at the bottom here. And there's even more related list hidden here in some additional tabs. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening on this page, which explains why back before Lightning, the only way we could accomplish this was with Visualforce, because the standard page layout would be very limited in terms of how much you can actually see on this page. When this customer asked us to start working on converting this Visualforce into a Lightning page, we wanted to take a very, very kind of high-level approach of looking at all the things that this page does. And we didn't want to just take this page and replicate it in Lightning. We wanted to really use this as an opportunity to look at their entire end-to-end business process. And we wanted to use it as an opportunity to find things that take a long time, many steps, many clicks to get through, to then simplify them so that it's easier to the user to do what they need to do faster and just simplify their life. I can tell you that with the time study that this customer has done, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't remember the exact number, but there's dozens, if not hundreds of clicks that a person needs to click through just to complete one of these work orders. And in many cases, in order to interact with this page, they would need to go into other pages to find information. So an example for that is, you see that on this line here, here's a component that we need to use. And we need to define which lot we need to use. A lot is a group of specific component that was manufactured at the same time. And so in order to populate and say, this is the lot that I want to use, they needed to open a different page and search for all the lots that are available for this item, find the one that meets their criteria, and then come back into this page, edit, and just type in the lot number, or look through it through a lookup page. But it was never a really simple activity. And these type of activities are what we wanted to really simplify when we started to work on the Lightning page. So I do want to take a moment to see, I'm sorry, yes, I do see some people asking me to zoom in a little bit. So thank you for that. I don't see any other questions, so that's good. I'll continue. I will say that when I zoom in, some of the pages may not appear as great as they would otherwise when we're a little bit zoomed out, and that's just, of course, because of my desktop. So the same exact work order that we're looking at right now, we are now seeing the Lightning page that we've created. And again, I'll just zoom out for a moment so you can see how it looks on my screen where I'm at 100%. And I'll zoom in so it's a little easier to see. But the page, unfortunately, is really optimized to work on pages on screen with high resolution. So a lot of the things that you can see are kind of on a first look seem the same, because we have the tabs here on the top and some more tabs here at the bottom. However, what we were able to do when we moved into Lightning is really think about, where is information presented? Does it really need to be all these different tabs? The tabs that we see here on the top are actually different than the tabs that we have here. And we're able to now really decide what fields show where. We can also hide pieces of information that are not relevant using features like dynamic forms, right? Dynamic forms is actually something that is extensively used on this specific page. And so the first thing that you see here is very, very makes sense, just looks like Lightning, right? We have some tabs here, we have a path, we have a record header with some buttons, and all of that is great. And in the tabs, we have some conditionally rendered fields or related list components, really. At the bottom of this, we have another set of tabs, and we can see that there's some additional information in here. So the first thing you may notice is this little component tab at the bottom here. And it kind of looks like a related list, but it also doesn't exactly look like a related list. We have this ability to select rows here. We have these weird looking buttons. And to those of you who may have seen something like this before, this might hint you to the fact that this is actually a flow rendered inside our page. And the reason we wanted to do a flow here instead of just a related list is we wanted really users to have a cohesive experience. So one of the things you can see here is that I am able to select rows here. I'm able to select a remove. When I click remove here, oops, sorry, let me refresh this page. When I click remove, because it's a button in the flow, you see that the entire area that had this what looked like a related list, the table, is really now showing me an option. Hey, do you really want to delete? And I can say yes, delete, or no, cancel, which takes me back to this main page. I can also add new rows right from here, and I can say add something else. So while it really is a related list in the sense that those are children records that are related to this work order that we're looking at, we're able to create, using flows, an experience that allows you to interact with that related list a lot more than you would be able to do if you're just using a standard related list. Where it really gets cool is when we say, okay, now we actually want to select the lots, right? So I mentioned earlier how user had to navigate out of this screen, open another tab or so on, and they needed to find these lots and select them and come back here and edit. So when I click on this little button here, well, this one actually tells me this is a component that was already issued. You cannot assign a lot to it. Actually, I selected two that were already issued. And of course, everybody loves confetti. So if I choose something that was not issued yet, sorry, here's one. I now am able to write on the screen here to say, okay, we're assigning lots for one item that I selected. Here's the component that I'm assigning. I need to find a lot that has at least 50 units. And here are all the lots that are available for this item in our system right now. And so all I need to do is say, okay, I want to use this lot, type I'm going to assign 50. I can also here decide that I only want to assign 20 to this and 30 to this lot. So I can actually say if I want to handle multiple lots. This is another operation that in the past would have taken at least 5 steps for a user to say, if I want to use 2 lots, I actually have to clone that line because I'm only allowed to assign one lot per line. So I have to clone that line and change the quantity on the first line to 20 from 50, change the quantity on the second line from 50 to 30, and then assign the lots accordingly. And I have to find those lots, go into each record and edit it. And so again, I'm just able to do this right from here. And if I do this when I assign the lots, basically this flow will do all of this work automatically. It will split those lines for them and assign them. And I can even decide I want to do 20 and 25. And when I do that, sorry, you selected to assign quantity 25, which is higher than the available. Okay, I did not look at the available. So I tried to assign 20 from somewhere that had less than 20. So I'm going to say 20 on this because it has 28. And I'm going to assign 25 from here. And I'm getting a message saying you're choosing to assign 45 units out of the actual quantity required of 50. This will result in the creation of a new component line with the remaining 5 on them. So I'll say, okay, that's fine. That's what I wanted to do. We're able to look at what the user is doing and actually ask them guiding questions to make sure that they didn't make a typo, catch these things in advance before we actually let them proceed, then having to realize they made a mistake and have to go back. So here it tells us what we did, and we can see that here the slot line for 20, another lot for 25. This was a new line that was just created that didn't exist before. And here's this one remaining line for 5 that was also just created that has no lot assigned to it. So again, the idea here is, again, just how do we create a user experience that really walks our users through the process that they need to go through instead of having to do a bunch of different steps to accomplish the same task. We'll take a look at this flow in 1 second and kind of look very briefly at how we accomplished all of that. I wanted to also show one of these other tabs, and here is another related list, and it also looks kind of like related list, but not exactly. And this is another Lightning component. This is not a flow. This is just a Lightning component called Enhanced Lightning Grid. It's actually a Salesforce Lightning component that was released by Salesforce Labs, which means it's available on the App Exchange, but it's also open source. It's available on GitHub as well, which means you could have a developer download it and make it your own if you wanted to. And what's cool about Enhanced Lightning Grid is that you can do some really cool things with columns. You can bring information from related records without having to create formula fields. You can also put buttons that are custom here on the top. And a button can be something that's available all the time or only when you select records like these do. And magically, I can also put buttons on the columns in the rows themselves. And so, for example, if I want to perform, I want to book the time. I want to say, okay, I just performed this step in our recipe, and I want to record how much time it took me to do this. I can then pop up a flow. Again, this is another flow that allows me to say, hey, this person now books this amount of time. So again, just using what's available to us, specifically open source components or the Salesforce Labs enhanced lightning grid in here to create something that would not have been able with the out of the box. And again, that's one of the things I love so much about Lightning is how much you can customize your user interface and make it your own, really your own. So at this point, I would really love to take a moment and pause and see if anybody has questions. And I would love for you to be able to post those questions. And I'm also happy to unmute somebody if they want to ask the question themselves.
All right, so we do have two questions. One from George. Ohad, can you describe best practices regarding integrating Salesforce with an ERP? For example, Sales Cloud includes products, price books, quotes with a lot of additional configuration possibilities. Do you see a clear line where Salesforce configuration ends and integrations with an ERP begins? What factors should we consider, e.g. system of record, storage limits, etc.?
That's a phenomenal question. And George, I'll give you a really short answer, but what you're asking is both a really complex question and at the same time not directly related to what we're talking about here today. And I would love for you to reach out to me. So I'll share my Twitter handle. After this, you can also find me on the Trailblazer community. I'm happy to have that conversation with you if you really want to get into the details. Rootstock specifically lives on Salesforce, so there's no real need for integration per se, because literally all the data is on Salesforce, and Rootstock has native integration with opportunities and orders and stuff like that, the standard Salesforce object. When we talk about integrating with the other ERP systems, and that's something that we definitely work with some customers to do as well, that clear line really depends on your use case, and further, things like system of records are also really dependent on the use case. ERPs by nature and by definition are typically considered the system of records. And so you have to kind of consider that when you define your business process and your integration process and how you handle conflicts and where does data come from, where does it need to originate from and all that. I don't think I can give you any other really valuable answer without getting to a lot more detail. So again, I'm happy to have the conversation offline if you would like to. Any other question?
Yes. Another one from Robert. What is the lab called, please? Did you say Enhanced Lightning Grid in AppExchange?
I did. I actually have it ready here to show you guys that, and you just jumped a little bit forward. Here is the Salesforce Labs Enhanced Lightning Grid component, and I'll make sure that when we publish this, I'll ask Jennifer to include some links on the video as well.
Great. And then a follow-up question from Robert. Do you have an example we can go to in order to see what you built, how you built the flow list you're displaying?
Not yet. How about that for an answer? Again, I'm really happy, excuse me, to have a conversation with anybody who ever reaches out to me. Feel free to ping me on Twitter, on the community, and I'm always trying to be very, very helpful when I can. I will say that that's definitely something I've been meaning to get done, is some videos of how we've configured some of these things. So hopefully something that I'll be able to share soon. Okay. So let's take a quick moment. Again, we don't have enough time for us to dive really deep into how all of this was built, but I want to at least give you some teasers and show you how we've done some of these things. So we'll start with this little component flow that you saw here. And this is this wonderful flow. It's not that big, and what you can see is also it calls two subflows. So when we click on that issue component or that assign update lot that we actually played with, it actually calls another flow and passes some information into it. But let's just see what we're doing here. So first thing, when the flow loads, so in case, let's just start with the Lightning page first. So I'll edit the page. I will say this page looks a little bit menacing in the edit mode because it has a lot of conditional components that are showing in one scenario but not other and all that. So don't freak out. What I can show you is under this component section, here's that flow, and flows obviously don't render when we are in the page builder, but I'm basically passing the record ID into a record ID variable inside the flow. So the first thing that I do inside my flow is I actually get that record. So get the work order with the ID equal to the variable that was passed in, and I'm then setting up some variables that I need to set. Then I'm getting the children record, those components that are children of that work order. And the next thing that I do is I bring this page up. This page has a bunch of components on it. And what you can see first is that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 button components. And when we look at this page, those are these wonderful buttons that we see on the top here, these 6 buttons. So already you can see I'm using a component to create these buttons that are not out-of-the-box capabilities of Flow. And I will also share with you the link to where you can find these both buttons in a moment, this component, because it's open source as well. Then I have this horizontal rule. That's just this line that would show up. I made it 0, but I put a little line under these buttons to make things align a little bit better. But the biggest piece is here, this data table. Data table is another open source Lightning component that you can download from unofficial Salesforce. It was created by a fellow Salesforce MVP called Eric Smith. His name is Eric Smith, phenomenal developer. He's also very connected with the people who are using it. So if you ever find issues or have wishes that you would like this table to be able to do, he is happy to take advice, and he releases frequently new versions of this component. In this component, I can configure a bunch of things. What is the collection of records that I want to show? Here's this get components that we got just an element before. And then we're able to configure the columns. When we configure the columns, we're then able to select which columns of this object we want to show on the table. In this case, this is using dynamic formula, so I can't show you that right here. There's a lot of things you can configure. Is this table required? Are we going to allow selection, those checkboxes on the left? Are we going to allow people to edit? One thing I did not show you is that there's some values that I can actually edit right here. So I can change values on this related list right from this table. It's another thing that, again, saves a lot of time, because previously they had to click this little edit button next to the row, wait for that page to open up, which could take a few good seconds, and then edit that value that they wanted to do, click save, wait for it to save, and then go back into here and refresh this page so you can then see the new values. So of course, now we can do this right from here. And when I update this value, all I need to do is click this Save Updates button, and the values are updated. So back to the flow, here's this data table that allows me to do all of these wonderful things. I can actually show you some of these attributes, which fields will be shown, which fields are editable. These are actually formula fields, flow formulas that allow me to have which fields show up dynamic. So I actually can control which columns show up on this table based on different information about this work order. So we have different types of work orders. You can see here, this is what we call a regular work order. We have a disassembly, we have rework, different types of work orders. And based on the type of work order, I will actually show different columns on this table. So again, super, super powerful. And this is basically this component. Learning how to use this data table component can take a little bit of a learning curve, but it really is not that difficult. And Eric has phenomenal tutorials on how to do all of these things. When I use these button components, you'll notice that it asks me what flow action I am taking. And all of these buttons take the same action. They're all the next button. So in essence, clicking any of these buttons, all it does is simulate as if you click the standard flow button next. However, what I can do is have a little decision after this, and I can check because these button components have a property or an attribute called is clicked. So I can say, was the assign lot button clicked? Then I can go that route and so on. So for each of these buttons that was clicked, I have a different set of activities that happen to the right of this to the side of this decision box. And a couple of those, obviously, those are subflows because they by themselves are pretty massive. And I didn't want to create a flow that looks so intimidating. However, I decided that these, when you click on delete component, for example, or save, what actually happens is pretty simple, and I didn't need to create subflows. I didn't want to just create more and more flows in the system because that has the potential to confuse and make it difficult to find things as well. So sometimes it's easier to just put it still on the same main flow to keep it readable, and sometimes if it's something really complex that you're calling, you would want to put it in a subflow to make sure that that piece by itself is a little easier to read, or at least it's really easy to understand what this flow is doing. We get the records, we go to the screen, based on whatever button the user clicked, we go to one of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or the refresh 6 options. Okay. Jennifer, please feel free to stop me if there is any questions, because I don't think I can see them.
Sure, there are actually two. One from Inez. Any considerations on the enhanced grid moving across environments? Is it data-driven?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because I was actually ready to show that as well. And look at that, I have sortable data grid. So sortable data grid is pretty versatile, meaning you can actually have it data-driven, but you can also have it metadata-driven. So the way that I like to think about it is when you develop a new sortable grid, you want to set the columns, the actions, all these things. I use the data side of things. So I go into this sortable data grid list view, and you can see I have a bunch of different sortable data grids. I'll click new and I'll start to configure it from here. You get to put the object, then the field that defines the relationship to the parent, any filters, stuff like that. And then here in the related list, we set all the columns that we want to show. So here's the name, the date, the transaction ID, blah, blah, blah. And then we have our actions, which are the buttons that we'll see. The sortable grid, the enhanced lightning grid package also comes with this useful field finder, so you don't have to know the API name. I can just find the field here. And what you can see is that whenever there's a relational field, like a lookup to another object, so the created by, I can show the ID, or I can actually go into the user and find user fields, and I can show those user fields as well. If I want to show the email of the user that created it, all I need to do is this, and I can then even override created by email, whatever I want to call that column. So it's a really powerful little tool. However, once I've developed it and I've had my user test it and they're happy with it and we know this is what we want to actually carry into production, I'll use this export wizard. And this export gives you this wonderful, massive JSON file. If you know what JSON is, great. If you don't need to know anything about this. All you need to do is copy this entire text and go into custom metadata. Find the sortable data grid metadata right here. Manage records. Create a new metadata record. In this case, this is the one we just looked at, and you just paste it right here. And so all of that configuration that you've created with data is now in custom metadata, and custom metadata, as you probably know, is deployable. You can deploy it with a change set or with packaging or with any other deployment tool that you use, Click Deploy, Copado, AutoRabbit, whatever it is that you use to deploy your stuff into between environments. So hopefully that answers your question, Inez. What's the other question?
The next one is from Jim. Did you use any record types and page layouts or just use dynamic forms?
It's another really good question. That's actually not something I was going to bring up, but I actually really thought about, do I want to use record types or do I want to not? The challenge with using record type for to create different lightning pages was that when you assign a record type, you also a lightning page by record type, you also have to assign it by profile. And I did not want to do that because that's too restrictive to me. So while you could use record types to drive some of this, in this case, I'm not using record types. Okay.
Yep, we're all set.
Yep, awesome. Okay, so I also wanted to take a look. So this is the point where I was going to go into the sortable data grid. So here's a sortable data grid. This is a quote unquote related list, right? It's a sortable data grid, enhanced lightning grid, interchangeable. And here's a list that right now shows no records. And I can actually click this button to create new waste transactions here. One of the things that is really unfortunate about Enhanced Lightning Grid is that these buttons are somewhat limited. When you look at the documentation for the Enhanced Lightning Grid, you'll see that you can do things like quick actions, you can delete records, but you can't actually call a flow. You could navigate to a URL, so I could actually have a button that navigates to a flow, and that would be a full screen flow that then the flow would have to have the return URL and all that. But if we wanted to have it as a model, as a pop-up like this, that was not something that was doable with the Enhanced Lightning Grid out of the box. And so what we've done at Praxis is we've actually developed a custom component that works together with the Enhanced Lightning Grid that allows us to do this. And we've actually just recently open sourced that component as well. So you actually can download this component into your org and use it together with the Enhanced Lightning Grid. And so I'll share the link to that as well. We call this the Flow Event Launcher. And here's a little video demo of how this works. And for this, we've done the demo of exactly how it's configured and how to use it. And of course, there's a lot of information exactly on how you would configure your Enhanced Lightning Grid to use our component to then launch a flow. In the end of the day, it all boils down to this. And we can say launch this flow, pass in some IDs to it, pass into this variable, and so on. I'm not going to get into a lot of details here. But in essence, we ended up using the Enhanced Lightning Grid and extending it slightly using this flow event listener component that then we decided to open source and make it available to all of you. And you can, it's open source, which means you can download the source code and make it your own, or it's available as installable packages where you can install it right into a sandbox or production org to play and test with it. Okay, so back to our record here. So I wanted to show how this was configured. So we'll actually start by looking at this sortable data grid for this waste transaction. That's what I kind of had open before. So here's waste cost transaction, and that's that little sortable data grid that we see here. I've already shown how you can define all the fields very easily. You can change the order and so on. You can even do on things like number fields. You can even do things like total. So you can even have summarized total or min or max or age or average of number fields, which is pretty cool to see in like a bottom of a related list, the total of all the records amount or whatever it is, right? And then beyond that, we have our actions. And here is those two actions that you see. We have two actions. One is record waste and one is reverse waste. The record waste is of type list button, which means we'll see it here in the list on the top. And the other one is a row button, which means we'll see it as a button on the row if we want to reverse this waste transaction. Because we have no rows right now, we don't see this. And one other thing that I love about Enhanced Lightning Grid, which I didn't mention, is that you can actually filter on any of the columns that you show here. So if you have a related list with hundreds of records or dozens of records, you only want to look at ones where created date is today or whatever, you can easily filter on all these records here. So when I click on this record waste transaction, let's look at how this button was configured. The event that fires is this event that we developed that is part of the component that we created. We give it an action order in case there's multiple actions that meet the same action type. The order will determine the order of how they're presented on the screen. The type, in this case, you can do a row action, a list action. Action versus button just means it will be under that little down button here like this. And then list button or list multi-select, where that means you have to select some rows to make that button actionable. You can even put an icon, and the icons are simply the Lightning Design System icons. So you can use any icon you want from this list here on your buttons. And that's pretty cool. And then the bulk of this, the magic happens in the event payload. And this basically says, I'm going to pass in some IDs. In this case, it's going to be the parent record ID, which means I'm not passing the record ID of any of the waste records. I'm passing the record ID of the parent, which is the work order itself. Excuse me, itself. I'm going to call a flow with this flow API name. And I'm going to pass in that parent ID, not just the ID. I'm actually going to pass the entire work order record into this variable called work order. Here's the object and the fields that we want to query from this object and pass into the flow. And the force page refresh just means that when we close our flow, that forces all the tables to refresh. You can kind of see that this refreshed very quickly. And that's useful because otherwise you would have to refresh the screen to see the new records that were added. And so now when I click on this button, it really executes this flow and passes information about this work order to this flow. So let's look at how I built this flow itself. This flow is not too complicated. It might, if you're not familiar with flows, it might be a little intimidating, but it shouldn't be very scary. And the first things that we'll look at is this work order variable. And it's just a record type variable. I named it work order. It's available for input, which means we can pass this variable data into this flow. And I'm now able to call this flow right from my component and pass that work order to. We have a couple of decisions here. This is decision that checking if the user has a custom permission that's required to do this. Then we're checking if this record is even in a state that allows us to record waste, because we only can record waste when the work order is in a certain state. And if not, we'll show a screen that tells you, hey, we're not ready yet, it has to be blah, blah, blah. And if it is, we're going to get some information about this work order, show a screen that allows the user to enter information about what they want to do with this waste, and then we just insert some data. We get some related data that we need. I'm not going to get into a lot of that, but in the end of the day, we're just creating a record that records that waste. And finally, we show a result screen, and that's it. We then allow them to click record another waste. That's why we have this decision here. And if they click record another waste, then we take them back to the first screen. So let's see how that looks when I actually do this here. So when I clicked, we're now at this first screen of the flow. So we already went through, I do have the right permission. The work order is in a state that is allowing me to record it. And I already got whatever I need to get. And now I'm on this screen right here. So I can put in a waste component, whatever that is. I can put in a lot number. I don't know if this will be a valid, this might be a better example. How much of the waste I'm recording. I'm using another, this is a component, this lookup component is a component that isn't actually open source, but Praxis will probably end up putting something like this out there. You can just use a standard lookup component. This just allows me to create a relationship between this lookup to this lookup so that I can look up for things based on whatever was selected in the first lookup. So because I selected this empty QC, I can only see location numbers with empty QC. If I had selected INSM, then, well, this is probably a bad example, but anyways, and I can put some comments. I did this because it's Friday. Hopefully this is a legal transaction, and of course, no. So I can't do this. I did not prepare well enough in advance for this, but it would have just shown this waste transaction right below and would have had that reverse transaction available as well. So again, I think we're at 3:50. We're kind of at the end of our time. I want to pause here before I kind of review a few other small things, and we can call this a day then. But Jennifer, any questions?
Yes, we have one from Stuart. Do you know if these tools are available for Salesforce Experience Cloud sites?
Some of them are. I'm not sure if the data table is available for Experience Cloud. I really don't know the answer to that. It might even say it on the page that I'll show you in a second, but something that's obviously very easy to install and try, or just reach out to Eric, the developer, and ask him. I have not, no, I have not tried to use it in Experience Cloud. I did use a bunch of other Lightning component in Experience Cloud as well, but just not specifically this one. I can even show you actually, if you go to Praxis's website, and you go to our Join Us tab, what you'll see here is that in our website, we actually have an Experience Cloud, a community really kind of framed in our website. And you can see what positions we have open. And right now we're actually viewing it as me, and I'm logged into our org, so it looks different than what you would see it if I was in an incognito screen as a community user. So something is funky. You'll just have to trust me. You can actually, what would actually, the way that we let people apply is actually by launching a flow that does use some components as well. So I don't know about all of these components. I can't tell you off the top of my head, but probably pretty easy to figure out. Any other questions, Jen?
One more, one from Sarah. Thanks for all the tips about working with the sortable data grid. Can you talk a little more about the event setting for the list buttons and what kind of thing would go there? Is that like a record change event?
For the list, Sarah, can you explain exactly what you're talking about when you said the list buttons? Are you talking about the buttons in the sortable data grid, these?
Sarah, if you could perhaps go off mute and then respond.
Sure, yeah, those buttons. Hi.
These buttons. So
Yes,
yeah,
thanks.
these are not like change events. They're not even events. They're firing what we call a lightning event. Without getting too technical, they're type of a pub sub event, but they're not a platform event as what you would consider it, if that's what you're asking. It's an event that can be listened by other components as well. That's the
great, thank you.
That's the short answer.
I'll look more into that.
What it also means, by the way, is that the component that we developed, while we developed it to be used with the sortable data grid, it's really not restricted. Any component that can publish a Lightning event can publish an event that looks like, like this. What the event type is this e.praxis.flow event, and the payload has the information that's needed, and our component will listen to it and will pop a model with the workflow, with the flow, in it. So it's developed to be used with Lightning Enhanced Grid, but Enhanced Lightning Grid doesn't have to be used. It can be used with other things as well. Okay, so let's look at some of these components. Based on some of your questions, we already jumped ahead a little bit, but some of these components, here's unofficial SF. In case you don't know unofficialsf.com, you'd need to. So go there and take a look. Here's just a sample of the flow screen components. These are all components you can download, install in your sandbox and production environment and use to make your flows more powerful. Things like capturing signatures, things like rich text input, things like special lookups, buttons like we talked about, file preview. There's just a lot more things. The data table is here, and those navigate buttons that I used are here. The confetti component that I used to show the confetti when the user completed what they were doing is all here, right? So these are all things that's open source, free, and available to you. Here's the data table component specifically that I was talking about, developed by Eric Smith. I mentioned this page is really long because he goes into a lot of detail about all the different things you can do with this. So there's a bunch of videos, and there's actually links to some other videos that are not even on this page to show you how to do even more advanced things beyond that. And you can see, this was released just in February. Before that, he had a release in January 8, January 6, January 1st, it's December. So as I mentioned, he releases new versions with new capabilities or bug fixes, pretty frequently overall. The navigate button is right here. Here's a demo that should look very similar to what you saw in my demo. And again, installable packages. Here's the links, documentation and installation. The enhanced lightning grid is available on the Salesforce App Exchange. It's also available on GitHub. So you can even go here to the GitHub page, and the entire open source is available here, as well as the documentation and the link to back to the App Exchange app. And again, the Praxis Flow Event Launcher is available at github/getpraxis FE Launcher, Flow Event Launcher. And I'll make sure that Jennifer has all these links to share when she posts the video. Yeah, I already walked through the sortable data grid, so I think that's all I had to share with you guys today. And again, I'm happy to open the screen to any questions that you guys may have, if something that I haven't already answered.
All right, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself.
So what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Wow, I love a lot of ice cream flavors. I would say that typically something with caramel. I love pralines and cream. I love, there's an ice cream by, oh, what's the name? Bluebell, I think, or something like that. That's a banana pudding. That's phenomenal. Yeah, I love ice cream. I'm definitely an ice cream person.
A bit more expensive.
Good question. I wonder where you got it.
Somebody was asking you before about record types. Could you explain that? You're saying you don't use record types?
So in this case, I selected not to use record types. So record types, obviously in the pre-Lightning Pay era, were the only way you can have different user interface, meaning different page layout show for different pages. Today, you don't really need that because with Lightning, you can have conditional components and dynamic forms, which make it just that much more powerful and less maintenance required because you don't need to add a field to 2 page layouts, or if you want to move a page, you don't have to go and edit 2 page layouts. You would just create one Lightning page, which conditionally shows the things you want to show when the page meets certain criteria. There's still some things that page layouts are useful for. Things like pick list values. You can have different pick list value based on the record type. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you can have page layout, and there's a handful of things that are still controlled by page layouts. For example, which related lists are available on a Lightning page are determined by which page layout is, which page layout is assigned to that record or to the user to that record. So that can be controlled by page record types as well. Record types as well. However, again, I'd rather do my related list conditional rather than having to control it by page layouts. So as much as we can move away from page layouts, there's very little value for record types from the user interface side of things. There's very many other reasons to consider using record types for other things. But from the user interface perspective, I don't really see a lot of value in record types except for pick list values at this point.
So you use dynamic content within the page to identify which page is going to show up.
Exactly right. So actually, I can show you some of that. So one of the things we cannot do, for example, on a tab group, I cannot have some tabs be conditionally rendered. So I actually wanted to have these tabs look different if this is a different type of work order. So you can see that I have the same group of tabs, the same group of tabs showing twice. In one of them, I have this waste, and in this one, I don't have waste. I have something else called derived components. Here I have components, here I have consumable components. Those are different, and you can see this little orange eye tells you that there's conditional visibility here. This one will show when the record is of certain the work order is of certain work order types, and this one is basically the mutually exclusive. It's either this or that, and never both of them will show. The same I can do with fields, right? These fields have conditional visibility on them. Only show this checkbox if this record meets certain criteria. On the cultivation tab, I have a section that says nothing to see here. This is not a cultivation work order. So this entire field section is conditional, and it will only show if it's a cultivation type of work order. But for any other type of work order, we'll just see this little message here that says nothing to see here. So if I go back to this, because it's not a cultivation type of work order, I will see this little message that says nothing to see here. I could have also created another set of these tabs without the cultivation tab in it, and then just show that without the tab altogether. So just a little choice of how much I want to create on this page. Any other questions? Or if any clarification? Okay, so I think we're pretty much at the end of our time. I am always happy to field additional questions. So if anybody has any follow-up questions to this session, my Twitter handle is right on your screen right now. Feel free to take a quick note of it. I'm happy to receive DMs or just open chats, open posts, mention me, whatever you want to do. And if there's no other questions, I really want to thank you, Jennifer, for giving me this opportunity to present, and all of you guys for finding this interesting enough to join and listen, and for all the great questions.
Yeah, a lot of great content, Ohad. And see, there was no heckling, right? You opened the forum and there was no heckling.
I'm surprised, yeah. I expected at least 1 or 2 heckles.
We definitely want you to come back again. So when we open it back up for presenters, I want to see your name in there.
Okay, if there's anything that you want me to talk about, let me know. Otherwise, I'll need to come up with something on my own.
All right, cool. All right,
okay.
thanks
Well,
everybody.
thank you, everybody.
And
Have a wonderful weekend.
Yep, we'll talk to you guys next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Bye.